Okay, this video will continue on discussing sheet creation and layout, and just a few more ways to manipulate those things and ways to label some of the features in working with viewports. So in the last one, we came in and created this PNP sheet from scratch, based on a new sheet or a new layout that we created. We resized it and added in these viewports and stuff. I do want to kind of backtrack just and show you the quick process. This is one of our standard sheets that they come automatically from our template, and it's much easier just using this if you have it. But if we come in, we'll just delete. This is just kind of a title block just to set in there. Delete that. We're just going to xref our 24 by 36 title block. We want to attach to this one. We're not going to specify insertion points this time, and it should just pop in right where we want it to go, because this is already set up for that. Now again, we'll still need to add in a title for the sheet. We can come in, we'll just delete that old layout there. So we can just grab one from an old drawing. Generally, it's the easiest way to do it. That way the style and everything is consistent. Or you can just note the actual style things here. But one good way to copy things between two drawings, highlight it and Control-Shift-C. Then you can specify a base point in this corner. Again, and then we can hit Control-V in here. Now you could just Control-C to copy between the two, but it doesn't specify a base point, so it gets a little harder to place it exactly where you want it to go. You can't just use the copy command between two drawings, just for reference. Again, we have our two viewports for our plane and profile. We can also do this for our section views. So this is a section 50 scale. We actually want the 10 scale because that's what we used to create our sections. Again, we'll just delete this, and you have to manually xref and attach your title block to each sheet, but once they're set, they will all automatically update if we make any changes. So since we can still just Control-V and copy this in, we'll call this roadway sections. Okay, and then we'll delete that too. Okay, so this one is a single large viewport for our sections, and maybe we can just start here and bring them in. We need to unlock this viewport. We're going to double click in here, zoom extents to find our stuff. Again, it's kind of this jumbled mess with all the annotations, so as we zoom in, we'll regen to find some things. Now we're going to zoom in here, but when you see these big tall, what that's telling me is that the drawing is still, since we xref this drawing is set to 1 to 50 scale. So we can drop that down to 1 to 10 using our annotation scale down here. And so we like to do, ideally, is zoom to where this box matches up exactly here. So since it's 1 to 10 scale, we could just zoom Z and then 1 over 10 XP to get the exact right, and then we can pan until that green line's basically right down in the corner, and then we can regen, and that'll pop it up in there perfectly for us. Okay, so then we want to lock our viewport now, and since we have two sections, two cross-section sheets, we can just copy this over. So we can right click on our tab down here, hit move or copy. And so just, if you haven't seen this, it works similar to the sheets in like Microsoft Excel. But you're not clicking here, you don't click the actual one you want to copy. Down here is where we create a copy, and that just creates a copy of the layout that we clicked on. This section is where it's going to go, where the new one's going to go. So it moves it or copies it to before one of these layouts. So we want to stick it between the 10 scale and the layout. So we're going to stick right here, click layout 1, and it'll set it right before there. So it's a little bit confusing how they do that, but so now we have a second cross-section sheet, and to put that in there, we'll unlock our viewport, double click, and then we'll just scooch it over. Again, we'll line that up there. We'll double click out of that, and then we can REA to regen everything. Probably need to scoot this up a little bit. Alright, there we go. And now we can lock that one. And so now we have our section sheets. Now these are already labeled, but we can go through and discuss the labeling here in a minute. So we'll go ahead and set up our P&P sheet again, just to kind of show you again the process. So we'll need to unlock our viewports. Do that both at once. Double click, zoom, extents. Come in and find our plan view here. Okay, and just for reference, again, we wanted to twist this so it's going horizontal. So we need to deview, hit enter to select everything, TW for twist, and we actually wanted it 270 because we want it to go left to right. We could also hit, I believe we can type -90. Let's see if that works. Yep, so -90 and 270 would work the same way. So now we want to set the zoom to be 1 over a 1 to 50 scale, so we Z 1 over 50 XP, and then we're just going to kind of line that up in here, kind of in the middle. Take that out of there. Okay, double click out of here, and now we're going to lock this top viewport. So go through the same process to find our profile, which is going to be down here somewhere. Right about in there. Now we're going to zoom 1 over 50 XP. Okay, and then we'll just try to line it up where the stations line up fairly decently. Okay. Okay, so now we want to again lock both of these, make sure they're locked. And for reference now, okay, so we can't move the view around anywhere. So the next thing I want to discuss is how layers work in viewports. So in model space, we have all these layers turned on, and we can turn on even more. So let's just say we turned everything on. Now we'll get rid of a few of these that we know we don't need here. Okay, those, maybe we don't want that. Okay. But normally, by the time you're creating sheets, you want to have most things turned on in your model space. Now you can turn these on and off, but just when you go to print your sheets, they'll need to be turned on in model space. But the nice thing is we can come in to our individual viewport, and if we double click here, we can come in and start freezing layers. So we probably don't want our, maybe we don't want our sample lines in here. We're gonna nip those out. Don't want our corridor. Take that out. So we have some guardrail labels, but for this one we'll take those out. We have some of these. Oops. Some of these we need to deal with, but those are on layer 0, which a lot of things are, so we'll leave those for now. But yeah, so you can come in and freeze specific layers just in the viewport. If we go back to model space, all of those are still here, and all those are still turned on. But the difference is they are now frozen specifically within the viewport. And I want to show you something. So when we go to layer properties, you'll note here there is a freeze button or a symbol, and there is VP freeze. So this is viewport freeze. So some things can be frozen on the main model, and some things can be also frozen on the viewport. Now you normally can't have something frozen in the model space but turned on in the viewport. It doesn't work that direction. But you note that right now it's not showing anything is frozen because we're in the paper space. But if we double clicked in here, now we can look and see, well, there are some things that we have frozen. Okay, but just in the viewport. So you see VP freeze, and you've got these three frozen, but they're not frozen in model space. So that's a nice tool to use. Sometimes that gets real tricky when you have multiple views. Maybe they overlap, and this is where your layers will get really important of how you label things and how your layers are set in your labels. So potentially you have overlapping views, so sometimes they need to be turned on in this view, turned off in that view, things like that. So sometimes you'll have to go in and potentially know which sheet your labels are on and create a layer for just the labels on that sheet that you can turn on and off individually. Speaking of labels, you can add labels at any time in model space. Okay, we can add these in as we go, but they may not be always, or it's trickier to work with them because potentially the orientation is not the same as in our sheet. The annotation scale is not the same. So I prefer generally to do labeling using the viewport itself, because it's locked in a set scale, a set orientation, and everything will kind of come from that. And to add labels, so now we'll kind of get into different styles of labeling. There's three main groups. So if you come up, there's a home tab and an annotate tab, and then over here this button's add labels. So these may not all be the same for everybody. You can create labels over in the settings. Under each of these drawing settings, you can create all your own labels for all different styles for things. But AutoCAD has some standard ones, and there are some that we have created ourselves. The three main things we'll need to look at for labeling our plan and profile sheets and our section views. We have labels set up for alignments, and so you have label types. So there's station offsets, points of intersections. Most of these will be station offsets, and we'll kind of work through these a little bit. There are some features for line and curve that we want, so single segments, and we can do bearing and distance, distance, azimuth, different things. You can do curves, distance over radius, all of these. So this is how we get our geometry into our drawing, to explain that to a contractor. In profile view, again, we have station elevation depth, which is another word for grade, and we can do that as a percentage or slope, ratios, things like that. And that'll come into play down in our profile view. And then lastly, in our section view, we can do offset elevations, grades, things like that. One last thing, so we can also label surfaces. We can pick slopes, spot elevations, contours, things like that. So this is really handy for just labeling, if you just want to generically label your surface, but also if you had things like a parking lot or sheets where you need to put elevations and mark those across. This is kind of where you go. But for right now, we are going to double click in here, and we're going to create some labels for our alignment. So we'll have an alignment, and we want just station offset right now. And there's a lot. This is where a lot of the styles, where you update things. So I'm going to try station offset and coordinates, and then I don't want any markers. So now I'm going to add, and it's asking me to select an alignment. Let's draw that over here. So here's my alignment. Select my alignment, and I want to just label the start point of the alignment here. So for these, it asks you station and offset. So okay. Now sometimes the style doesn't look exactly what we want it to look like. Sometimes when we drag it, it looks a little bit different. So we can play around with this. We can change some of these things, the markers. We don't want to change the marker styles, but we can change the actual style of this. So if we would have just done, let's say, the station offset, we can add that. Okay, and now this is more of a style we're familiar with. And so sometimes some of these are set up in AutoCAD previously. And again, that's all over here in your drawing settings where you can manipulate these. You normally want to have a northing and easting for the beginning point and end points of your alignment. So it's easier for the surveyors to reference. But if you look, so we have a station and an offset. And now these labels work a little bit differently than if we did our dimensions. So there's not as much we can manipulate here. We can't go in and change the size. We can't change colors, things like that. We can set it to a different layer. A lot of times they'll automatically come in on layer 0. For alignment, roadway things, we generally want to put it on a C road text layer. Okay, but we can't just double click this and change this however we want. Now we have to go to edit label text up here. And if you note, this looks a lot more complicated than what it is down here. This essentially is kind of an algorithm or whatever you want to call it, that tells this is the style that we set. And it basically says in the style, write STA colon, and then figure out what the station is of whatever the alignment was. And then comma, here's your offset, and then here's what side the offset is. Okay, you can update this and change some of this in the properties and in the style, but that's kind of a bit more complicated than what we're discussing here. You can go in and manually change these things. You know, we could just delete all this, do everything, or you could add text. So we could come in and type begin construction center line here, right? Obviously, normally when it's a 0 offset, we could just get rid of the offset. Okay. So we've got a begin construction center line. So, and we could add these northing, easting, things like that. Some things to consider as we move along. You want to label generally the beginning of your construction center line, beginning of your alignment regardless. You want to label the beginning and the end, but also the beginning and end of where your project actually starts. So we don't have our corridor turned on, but somewhere in here. So we can add another label, or we can always just copy labels. So we could copy this one. We'll just say it's right about there. Oops. Okay, so now we want to change our text. So now this isn't this construction center line, but we want to begin roadway improvements per typical section, or something similar to that. Okay. And the one nice thing about when you label within your layout view, within your profile view, you can see how things look exactly and how it will look. You can see how your station labels, because you'll want to avoid those when you're doing your other labeling. And so this can get quite complex and convoluted in here, where you have to try to avoid a lot of features to draw all your lines, but it's a whole lot easier to see here. So for instance, if we go back to model space, those things we just drew look like this, and that's not how they look in our sheet. So you wouldn't want to spend all this time working in model space getting all your labels looking exactly the way you want, because that's not how they're going to come through in your actual sheet. Okay, so that's something to keep in mind. So doing your labels within the actual sheet is the most important thing. A couple of other things. So for the plan and profile sheet, line and curve. So if we want a single segment, we want, say, like bearing over distance. Okay, we're going to add that. And so, let's see. We want to be able to click here. I think because it's extra. Oh, I'm not clicked inside of there. Apologies. That's why it's not working. There we go. Now it'll show up. Okay. And then we can come in here and create labels. So we have a few spots where we have shifted the pitch of the alignment. I think those are the same here. Okay, so, and we can drag these along the alignment kind of wherever they're out of the way. But it's good to have a label for the bearing and the distance here. Okay, so for different geometric points. And it'll tell how far and what the bearing is. You can do that for curves as well, especially it'll be important for like special ditches and things to really document the curves and how that works. Okay, so that's the bulk of what you're going to be working with as far as labeling your plan sheet. For your profile view, the labels work pretty much the same. If we double click in here, we'll need to go to add labels for profile view. And so again, there's different ones. We can do station and elevation, so we can start there. So we just want station elevation. I don't want any markers. And now it asks to click a profile view. So here's our profile view. Again, some of these are already on here, but we want to start at the, again, whether it's in plan view or profile view. So we'll change this one, would now be C road profile text. Okay, and we can do the same thing now, that we can say this is the beginning of the construction center line. Center line. But now we have a station and an elevation to go with this. Or that's actually the beginning of the road improvements. So back here's this beginning of the center line. And so for this one, again, maybe we'd switch it to begin road improvements per typical section, and then a lot of times it'll have the elevation and you'll just want to write match existing, something like that. Okay, and now we have that point located. You know, these labels come up automatically for our profile when we create our profile. Depending on the label style that you set, a lot of these are already there. But you can do things, so depth, you can put a grade %. And again, you need to select your profile view, but normally you're going to pick 2 points. So let's just say we wanted to pick this, our slopes from the abutment. Well, that didn't pop up, so I'm not sure what happened there. But we can add grade profiles. We can add all kinds of different labels in here. So lastly, I just want to cover our section labels. So when we do our section labeling, this one isn't as big of a deal to do directly in model space, because obviously they're going to be at the same orientation. There's no flipping these around, there's no skewing these, and when we create them, they're also going to be, to make them look right. So if we change the model space 1 to 50, so if it's at 1 to 10, we're at the right annotation scale here. Actually, this is extra, so it won't make a difference. But if you're at the right annotation scale, this will all come in exactly the same. Okay. So we can do this on either one. So now, a lot of times these don't always show up perfectly right. You have to regen. But even here, sometimes the little dots that we're looking for may not always show up. And so there's a couple things you can change. There's the LT scale. We can change that between 0 and 1 normally. Oh, no, so that one's set to 1. I think it's the PSLT scale that we want to potentially manipulate. There we go. And see, now that changes. So those are a couple changing the LT scale. So that's the line type scale. And the PS LT scale would be the paper space line type scale. So because that was off, and that's only between 0 and 1, the line type scale can change to a bunch of different things. So now we have all of our grid dots. Now, because this is XREF, we can't directly mess with the labels here, but we can add some, and this will work the same way. We add our labels, section view, and let's just say our offset elevation. Now we're going to take the markers off. Now we have set up multiple offset elevation label styles. So we have flow elevation, offset match existing, and offset over elevation. So we're going to do a flow elevation. And now this is a point that really is important to keep in mind. When we add labels to a section view, we have to add them. We are selecting a section view. So we can come in, now we want to say this is our flow line here, our flow line elevation. Now we don't have another flow line. Now I can just come in here and start clicking on any of these sections and it'll give me a label, okay, but it's not always accurate. It still is referencing a very specific section view. Okay, so your labels can be off if you just keep clicking. It makes it a little bit more difficult, this process, but you need to select a single section view, create labels, manipulate them, and go from there. Okay, now the one nice thing, say, well, that's not the right label, and so we can drag these, but say that's not a flow line, that's the edge of the pavement. You can actually come in, now that you've got it highlighted, and in your properties you can change the style as you go. Okay, and so that's really helpful. So normally you want to, if you have ditches, you want to label the flow at the bottom of the flow line at the center point of the ditch. And then it's good, it's not 100% necessary, because obviously it's on the sheet, but I prefer to add an offset and elevation and then a match existing for basically your final, your toe line or your cut line out in space there. So we can just work through, and you can manipulate these in the same way, and we can again edit the label text. Even though this is set up, you know, something you could just say begin ditching or something like that at this one. So you can still add text, all those things, you can work through those. Um, but again, this is one you can do either in model space or through the viewport. But again, doing the viewports, it helps for final creation of these and labeling. So I think that's probably it for this. So this video, I think we've gone through most of the things we can discuss. We'll probably do one more video on sheets to cover sheet sets and plotting of sheets and kind of all the the specific settings as far as that goes. But this one's running kind of long, so we'll probably end this here. So thanks.